What's going on, guys? It's Fantasy Stock Exchange here, bringing you another episode of our scheduled Predictor series. Today, going over the Carolina Panthers, joined by my boy Mikey Ostrowski. Mike, how you doing today? Anything you want to plug?
I'm great, man. Obviously, I gotta plug my own Twitter here. So before we get into it, feel free to follow me at ff_Mikey10. And I am currently a writer for the Loaded Box podcast. They are at Loaded Box on Twitter, and the guys over there are pretty fun, pretty funny. Keep it light, so definitely a recommended follow. And I usually have an article out here or there, so feel free to give it a read.
For sure. Make sure you go check out his Twitter, check out Loaded Box, and hit that intro. You recently released your projections for the season on your Twitter, so feel free to go check that out because Mike does a lot of work over there.
Yeah, absolutely. I getting a lot of ticked off people with my projections, but some people like them. So, sure. Projections are one of my favorite things, projections and rankings, because it really sparks a good conversation because you're never going to find someone that completely agrees with you. So, I love posting stuff like that.
For sure. I mean, I went through them. They look pretty good to me, other than the little Hayden Hurst thing I had to pick at you about. But
of course.
Aside from that, Panthers. You're a big Panthers fan. How'd you end up being a Panthers fan?
So it's funny because I grew up in South New Jersey, so you'd think that I'd be a Philadelphia Eagles fan. But when I first started getting into football, I was about 7 or 8 years old. My dad is a massive Chicago Bears fan, and he looks at me and he goes, "We got to get you into football, but you can't like the Eagles." I said, "All right, fair enough." So I spent the entire summer trying to figure out who I wanted my team to be. That summer, we happened to go to a wedding in Charlotte, North Carolina from Bank of America Stadium. And I remember thinking the Panther statue was just too damn cool. And then we got home. I got the new Madden. I think it was like Madden 04, Madden 05, whatever McNabb was on the cover of. And yes. My player got drafted to the Panthers, so I took it as fate. And ever since then, I've been a massive Panthers fan.
That's awesome. I'm just thankful you're not an Eagles fan because we'd be picking back and forth. If you've ever checked the videos when we have Bootleg on here, Ryan, he's a massive Eagles fan. I'm a massive Cowboys fan, and that's just a fucking shit show. But
Sure.
That's definitely a fun story. So far, currently, who's your favorite Panther? I know the answer, but tell them about your love for this current guy.
I love Christian McCaffrey, dude. When he got drafted a few years ago, there's a video of me somewhere standing in my dorm room at college, screaming and shouting how pumped I was that they got Christian McCaffrey. I cannot say enough good things about the guy. I mean, before he was a Panther, it was definitely Steve Smith. Obviously, always been a big Cam Newton fan too. But Christian McCaffrey, man, like even if you're not a Panthers fan, how can you hate that guy?
For sure. I mean, that guy's just a beast. Carried me to a fantasy championship this year, so shout out to him. Segue into this year. What are your thoughts about the current state of the Carolina Panthers?
I don't hate it as much as a lot of people. I understand that there is a rebuild going on, but at the same time, the management isn't exactly telling us there's a rebuild going on, given the contracts they're giving out. So I'll start by saying I do fully support giving Christian McCaffrey $16 million a year. I mean, we were talking about this before we started the episode. He's not a one-dimensional running back. He is that RB1, wide receiver 1, all put together. I mean, the dude just put together 1,000 yards rushing, 1,000 yards receiving in one season. I mean, the guy's special. He deserves the money. And I also understand that the defense is rebuilding. It's extremely young. Luke Kuechly just retired out of nowhere, which – it still crushes me. Yeah. When he came out with that retirement video a few months ago, it was total gut-wrenching to watch. But I understand the rebuilding process on defense. My biggest issue is the Teddy Bridgewater signing. And the whole reason for that is I don't think that he is what this team needs now if we want to win. I think giving him $60 million is just a bit too much for my liking. Like, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not a Kyle Allen fan by any stretch of the imagination. I hated having Kyle Allen on our team last year, but I would rather have Kyle Allen at a super cheap price than Teddy Bridgewater for what we're paying him now. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I've never been a huge Teddy fan. I get it. Like, maybe like you had the roster to compete. You just need that stable quarterback. But I mean, the Panthers have holes, especially on defense. Kuechly's huge. Kuechly's a huge loss. I mean, I've loved that guy since he came into the league. I still remember 2012. I was a big fan of Morris Claiborne. Don't get me wrong. Which kind of bit me in the butt because one of the biggest busts. I mean, you watch that guy in college, you'd assume he'd just be a monster. But yeah, we traded up for him. Ultimately, Kuechly went a few spots later to the Panthers, and he ended up being one of the best linebackers of our generation. So you guys made a good pick there. But 2020, straight on. You guys think you guys potentially can contend or middle of the pack or vying for the number one? What are you expecting with the team this year?
So if I'm being optimistic, I'm going to say Christian McCaffrey's carrying us 16-0, baby. But if I'm being realistic, I don't expect much. It's an incredibly competitive division, arguably the most competitive division in the entire NFL. I mean, the NFC South, especially now that Brady's there, like it's stacked. I don't think there's any realistic possibility of them winning the division, and I don't foresee them taking a wild card spot. Best case scenario, maybe they come away with 6 or 7 wins, but I'd feel comfortable with projecting them at around 5 wins for the season.
Yeah, I agree. I personally have them about 5. Now, the consensus, as we kind of mentioned, is a little bit lower on them. Kind of made you barf when you saw it, but hey, I'm pretty sure that's number 1 pick, and Trevor Lawrence might sound awfully fine. But we'll go through the schedule, kind of go over what you like, what you dislike, what you would change, everything. That's what we're here for. So, yeah, we'll start with week 1. I mean, at home against the Raiders. Now, what are your thoughts on that matchup right there?
I do think that's a game that Carolina can steal. The Raiders they're also still putting it together. Their defense is not anything absolutely stellar. Their offense is not anything absolutely stellar. I mean, Henry Ruggs is essentially their wide receiver 1 at this point. Now, don't get me wrong. Tyrell Williams looked great last year. Hunter Renfrow is going to come into his own. I think that he could potentially be, a stud in the NFL. But that's also a team that is still kind of putting everything together. You don't exactly know what they're doing. Just given that it's week 1, Carolina's home. You have this new coaching staff that's going to be really fired up just to get out of the gate. I do think that's one that Carolina can win.
For sure. I mean, the way I look at that game, this is one I think the Panthers can win as well. The way I look at that game, who on the Raiders is going to stop Christian McCaffrey or DJ Moore? Ultimately, like the biggest weakness on the Raiders is their secondary.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone on that team that can really put a stop to McCaffrey's game. And especially with Joe Brady coming in as the offensive coordinator, like Christian McCaffrey, like when you think about his stats last year, they are absolutely phenomenal. And I'm not going to say that he's going to have better stats than he did last year, but there is a realm of possibility where that happens on this offense, especially with Teddy Bridgewater as the quarterback.
Like we could look again. I've been saying, I think you've been saying, like there's a lot of people out there that first of all, I'll just preface by saying I disagree with that. Oh, sell McCaffrey, like dynasty players. Oh, sell McCaffrey. You know what? Running backs are going to depreciate. You don't want to let them depreciate in value. Just look at Gurley, look at blah, blah, blah. Okay, but were you selling Marshall Faulk in his peak? Were you selling LaDainian Tomlinson in his peak? No, you ride those guys out because ultimately here, those are the guys that win you championships. Christian McCaffrey under Joe Brady, who's saying he can't have 2,500 total yards? Who's saying he can't have 20, 25 total touchdowns? Like anything's in the realm of possibility. We saw what he did on a dumpster fire with Kyle Allen under center last year. Like now you get Teddy Bridgewater again. You mentioned that you don't agree with the contract, but I mean, just from a player for player like comparison in terms of like how good they are, Like Teddy Bridgewater smashed him out of the park, coupled with the fact, I mean, he's coming from a system in New Orleans that had Kamara, that had Michael Thomas. Like, it's a similar system. I said in a recent DJ Moore video, I'll plug that in the description as well, but it was an ADP battles between DJ Moore and Odell Beckham. And I took DJ Moore because I said, listen, we saw what DJ Moore was able to do in his second year, 87 catches in basically 14 games, got hurt in his 15th game, ultimately only having one catch in that game. Who on this offense profiles most as a Michael Thomas type role in this offense? It's going to be DJ Moore. Now, I don't think he's going to turn into the next Michael Thomas. That's not what I'm saying. But, man, if there's somebody that's going to get 140, 150 targets in this offense, it's going to be DJ Moore. And we've seen it from both a schematic sense from where Joe Brady's coming from, coupled with the fact that what the player was able to do last year. I mean, DJ Moore took a huge sophomore step. I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up, when it's all said and done, ended up getting into that top 5 type range. So what are your thoughts on DJ Moore? Because, again, you've heard I'm super bullish on him.
I'm a massive DJ Moore fan. I will admit that when I ran my projections this year, I was a little disappointed at what I found with DJ Moore. But then again, that's just my pessimism with Teddy Bridgewater being the quarterback. I think in the future, DJ Moore, total stud. I still remember on draft day when Carolina got DJ Moore, Cam Newton sent out a tweet that said, "Thank you." That was it. Just thank you. And simultaneously, Steve Smith was reporting for the NFL Network, and he goes, "Guess what? The Panthers finally got a guy to step into my shoes." And I couldn't agree any more. I mean, DJ Moore is a franchise wide receiver that I'm going to be very happy to have on the team that I'm rooting for the next however many years.
Yeah, heck, 22-year-old receiver, basically, hopefully, fingers crossed, for the next 10 or so years. I mean, you got a legit stud. So, transitioning, I mean, we agree here. Panthers can steal that one against the Raiders. I'll definitely agree with that. I think that young team, fired up, new offensive coaching, new offensive system in general, can definitely steal that one at home. So, week 2 is going to ultimately be the tough one because this is the team that the Panthers, for whatever reason, the Buccaneers have their number. Like, the Buccaneers, for whatever reason, always seem to stop McCaffrey. Like, that's the only team that can actually slow that guy down. I remember week 2, again, we were talking about it before the video started. Week 2 last year, the Buccaneers came in week 2 and just absolutely just bullied the entire offense. So what are your thoughts on that game? I kind of dissed the team a little bit, but I don't mean to sound like a fucking dick, but yeah.
No, it's okay because I would agree. I think this is a game the Buccaneers take. Historically, especially in recent years, Carolina cannot do anything against Tampa Bay, let alone in Tampa Bay. Not to mention, the defense is rebuilding. Like we were talking about, we don't have Luke Kuechly anymore. We just drafted 3 rookies with our top 3 picks on defense, and they'll probably all be starting. It's not a defense that's going to have an answer for Tom Brady, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. Like, it's just not going to happen. So I don't think this is a game that Carolina is going to come away with.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree there for sure. Again, sorry. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it like on the channel before. The Buccaneers are going to take that step now. I don't know. Like, again, Bush is going to say, "Oh, Super Bowl, whatever." Like, whatever. We'll get into that, but I think they'll be a much improved team. Again, 30 interceptions from their quarterback last year, and still able to get around the 500 mark. Now, I'm not going to dismiss Jameis Winston at all because, I mean, other factors of the game. I mean, you can't argue 5K yards, you can't argue 33 touchdowns, but man, if they cut down the turnovers this year, that offense will be even more efficient than it was last year. Help out their defense. So this isn't a Buccaneers video. I know Bush will get into that, but that just kind of lays it over. I don't mean to hype up the team that you hate so much, but
okay, you know what? I totally understand because they're going to look good this year. I think they're being a little overhyped, to be completely honest, but the Bucs are going to look good this year, and it's definitely not a team that the Panthers are going to be able to beat, at least in Tampa Bay.
For sure. Maybe in 2021, but
yeah.
Week 3, you're going to the Chargers. I mean, I don't necessarily believe that to be a huge home crowd advantage. I mean, if we've seen their attendance numbers from last year, it was pretty bad. I mean, I think it was like 16,000 less than the next lowest team. But where do you have that one going?
This one to me is kind of a toss-up. Maybe my bias comes into play here, but I do think Carolina could take this game. I don't know if you have seen my quarterback projections. For those of you listening, if you haven't taken a look at them, go to my Twitter page and check them out because it's awesome. But anyway, I think Justin Herbert is actually going to be the starting quarterback as soon as week 1 on that team.
I like that.
It's not that I'm hating on Tyrod Taylor. It's just that if this team is being realistic with themselves, they might as well start developing Justin Herbert early. I do think he's NFL ready. I do think he can come in, but I don't think he's going to be, some world-breaking rookie quarterback right off the bat. I think this game is going to be a toss-up, but I do think this is a game Carolina can win. Christian McCaffrey should feast against this team. They don't really have to worry about Bosa too much because Christian McCaffrey can literally just run the other way, and it'll be perfectly fine.
I mean, the biggest strength of the Chargers would obviously be their secondary. But if you're just looking at the front seven, again, Bosa's been kind of nicked up recently. Ingram, again, the aging. It's still good players, obviously. But the main thing about them is their inside linebackers are both very young. I mean, Kenneth Murray is a rookie this year. And Drew Tranquill, second-year player. I mean, they got potential, but week 3 playing against Christian McCaffrey, it's definitely going to be a learning experience for those guys. So I can definitely see the Panthers going in to LA LA, sorry, and stealing that from the Chargers. So I can change that for you right now. Let me just write that down. All right, perfect. That's already up in the win total. It's a little sneak peek, but week 4 going up against the Cardinals. This is a fun, young, what should be a shootout, to be quite honest. But what are your thoughts on this game?
So we just added a win. I'm going to have to take one off.
Gotcha.
I can't let my bias take over in every game. And I don't think this game is going to be a toss-up. I think the Cardinals are actually going to have a pretty commanding lead at some point in this game. Kyler Murray looks fantastic. He's got DeAndre Hopkins now, which he totally didn't need, but he has him. And I'm a pretty big believer in Kenyon Drake, and even Chase Edmunds as a change of pace back there. So I think this Cardinals offense is going to come in. They're going to be a massive headache for the Carolina defense, and I don't think we'll be able to play catch up with
them. Speaking of Chase Edmunds, I'm glad you mentioned him. We've hyped him up on this channel so often. I mean, where he's going right now, he's going outside the first 10 rounds in a redraft. Like, take that value right now. If you guys are doing your best balls right now, steal that, because, I mean, you'll touch upon it as well. But Chase Edmunds is easily one of the best running back values currently going, and it's really not a debate. But yeah, touching upon that Cardinals offense a little bit as well. What are your thoughts on the ultimate? Like, again, it's kind of projecting forward, but do you think that they'll revert back to the air raid or be more run dominant? Or like, what are your thoughts on what's ultimately going to transpire? Because down the stretch, once they got Drake, they kind of went more run heavy. But I don't know. What do you think is going to end up happening?
I think they're going to keep it pretty balanced. Kenyon Drake and Chase Edmunds, they can both catch the ball. So they do have a lot of options. Plus, you add in the fact that Kyler Murray is just incredibly, mobile. I think this is going to be a very, very even team when it comes to rushing and passing, because they have guys that can literally do it all. In terms of production for DeAndre Hopkins, I don't think that he sees production as high as he did in Houston, because he's not going to be relied on as heavily, because this offense can actually sustain success without having to use Hopkins. So I do think it's going to be a very, very balanced attack.
I like that a lot. So if any of you are looking at it, balanced attack. Let's get going. This is ultimately we'll touch upon the week after, but this week right now at the Falcons, again, looks like another potential shootout. What do you ultimately got going here?
This one I would give to Atlanta just because they are the home team.
Gotcha.
These NFC South games, the home team advantage is very, very big in any division game. The NFC South especially. It's like I said, I mean, that division is so tough. It's so ruthless. The Atlanta Falcons have one thing that Carolina definitely does not, and that's experience. Their team is full of veterans. Their defense is still hit or miss, but you have an attack that's led by Matt Ryan, Julio Jones. They have Todd Gurley now. Calvin Ridley is a stud in the making. Obviously, Hayden Hurst is coming in, he is going to be a stud in Atlanta. I don't know if it's as soon as this year. We could talk about that one later. But I do like Hayden Hurst even in 2020. Again, a lot of this comes down to, I don't think the Panthers defense is going to be able to handle this caliber, attack. I don't think they'll be able to do it. Do I think this whole thing is going to be a shootout? Absolutely. Whenever Carolina and Atlanta play against each other, it has the potential to be the highest scoring game of the entire
Smash
league.
the over.
What's that?
Smash the over, whatever it is.
Definitely. But when all said and done, I think Atlanta will come out on top in the shootout.
That's definitely fair. I agree with you there. Both possessing super high potent offenses. Again, you mentioned some of Atlanta's weapons, the addition of Gurley, the addition of Hurst, and then you still got Julio and Calvin Ridley. So I'll agree with you there. I mean, Calvin Ridley is easily one of the biggest breakout candidates of this year. I think anytime you log into Twitter, someone's writing about him. So I like Calvin Ridley's potential a lot here, but transitioning over. I briefly prefaced it after the Cardinals game, but this is the one I feel like you're kind of barfing at on the inside. But what are your thoughts on the Bears at Panthers here?
Oh, man. When you told me that you guys, the consensus was Chicago is going to beat Carolina, oh, my God, I almost threw up. I think this is a game Carolina comes away with. And the reason being is that Chicago's defense is good. It's not a secret. They have a really good defense. But their offense, with the exception of Allen Robinson, is just disgusting and not in a good way. I don't care if it's Mitch Trubisky. I don't care if it's Nick Foles. This is not an offense that is going to be a legitimate threat. And this is definitely a team that I think the young defense in Carolina is going to be able to handle. So I'm 1,000% going to take the Panthers at home on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sorry. My bad. Sorry. I agree with you there fully. We've touted Anthony Miller, talent. Oh my God. Sorry. I gotta sneeze, but I haven't yet. I'll probably just cut that little bit out. And all right. Again, with the Bears, you mentioned they're very unproven. The big thing that really has me concerned is people magically think that Nick Foles is just gonna step in, walk in. Oh, it's Philly Nick Foles. Nick Foles led Philly to the Super Bowl. Why can't he be good with the Bears? Well, I'll tell you why. Why did Nick Foles succeed in Philly? Because the offensive line was so good. When you're looking at Nick Foles, when he's able to get protected, when he's able to stay on rhythm, stay on time, and ultimately be able to process the defense and just deliver passes, he can be an efficient quarterback. Now, he's not going to get that luxury in Chicago. He is one of the worst quarterbacks in terms of pocket mobility. He can't move to save his life. He's literally a fucking lead factory over there, but he can't fucking move 3 inches to evade a rusher at all. So what do you think is going to happen when he steps in, gets pressure within 3 seconds, and isn't able to evade pressure? I mean, if you're dealing with a Russell Wilson or a Kyler Murray, okay, it's not as big of a deal. Ultimately here, you got lead foot Nick Foles. I mean, he's got another thing packing for him, but I mean, his feet are definitely not something that are to his advantage. But ultimately here, I agree with you. I think the Bears are definitely one of the biggest question mark teams in the league, as you kind of see here. But we'll get into that another day with the Bears guy. But yeah, I agree with you. I do like the Panthers in this game, especially at home. That Bears defense can be tough, but at the same time, their offense is so anemic that they may give you guys chances for 3 points anyway. So I like that pick for sure. However, one team that definitely isn't a gimme is the Saints on the road. Now, I kind of think I know where you're going to go here, but I want to hear you here.
Yeah, we're not winning this game.
Okay.
I don't remember the last time I watched Carolina take a win in New Orleans. I really don't. Maybe it's happened more recently than I'm thinking of, but historically, it's just going off of my own memory. I never have fun watching a game that's being played in New Orleans because Drew Brees is absolute next level when he's home. There's no secret that Michael Thomas is just absolutely phenomenal. Alvin Kamara is incredible. Their defense is incredible, and it's only getting even better. This is one of those games where I don't even know if I want to turn it on because Carolina's going to get smacked around.
Another factor that definitely isn't going your way. I mean, the schedule makers just absolutely hate Carolina here for whatever reason, but they're also coming off a bye, as I see here. And Sean Payton at home, coming off a bye. I'll agree with you there. We'll just move on and forget about that one.
I will say though, maybe something happens because Teddy Bridgewater is going back there, but like it's not like it's like some kind of revenge story. Like he was on his deal with New Orleans was done. It's not like they dealt him for pennies or they neglected him. Like they have Drew Brees. Realistically, they weren't keeping him anyway. Like it's not some sort of revenge tour. So maybe you can swing it that way, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have Jameis against Teddy in that game. Okay, I'm kidding. Going back here, week 8 at home versus the Falcons. Kind of preface what you said earlier. Home field matters a ton. But what are your thoughts on this game? Ultimately, giving the Panthers the win here on Thursday night.
So if this was a normal Sunday game, I would give this to the Panthers. But since this is going to be a Thursday night game, I'm honestly going to give this to the Falcons. And the reason why is because Julio Jones loves playing in Charlotte for some reason. And Julio Jones loves playing in primetime. Every single year in one of the two games, and it's usually the one that gets played in Carolina, every single year, Julio Jones puts up like 200 yards. A couple years ago, he put up 330 yards and like 3 touchdowns or something ridiculous like that in Carolina.
I remember that.
And it leaves a bad taste in my mouth whenever I see the Falcons coming to town, especially on a primetime game. So that I'm giving that game to Atlanta. Again, though, like I was saying for week 5 when they play Atlanta, it's going to be a shootout. It's always a shootout with these two teams. Neither team, no matter how good the defenses are in any given year, these two teams forget how to play defense against each other.
I mean, especially if you've seen their defenses last year, they can mix their units together and still be a bottom half of the league defense.
Yeah.
Just touching upon how you said Julio Jones just absolutely torched you guys a couple years ago. I remember that specifically because I had him in fantasy that year, and I was pretty stoked. So, hey, I think I was playing half PPR. He had like 48 points or 47 points or something like that. Like it was absurd. You're just seeing him breaking tackles on a freaking intermediate route and just housing it. It's like, what the heck? Where was this all season? He scored like 3 touchdowns in that game and then scored like a touchdown. Like I think he scored like 2 touchdowns the rest of the year. It's like, what? Okay.
Yeah, he's a stud, man. He really is a Panther killer, though.
For sure. I mean, I don't want to bring you down some dark memories, but I still remember that 15-1 year where Julio Jones was the one loss, pretty much. 2015.
Yeah. It's all right. You know what? There's only one loss that really matters in that year, and I still have nightmares.
Vaughn.
Oh my god.
Oh man. But yeah, no, I lost some money because I stupidly made a bet that the Cardinals would win the NFC Championship. So that was a little rough for me.
You know what though? Back then, I doomed the Panthers. I will take full responsibility because right before the Arizona game came out, I tweeted out, wow, the NFC title game is going to be better than the Super Bowl because I thought that Carolina and Arizona were like leaps and bounds better than the teams available in the AFC. And then, of course, Carolina comes in, completely trashes Arizona. I'm like, cool, we're going to get the Super Bowl. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then it happened. I don't want to talk about it, but it's my fault.
I still can't believe, like, obviously, Peyton Manning, we can both agree, one of the best of all time. But, man, with how bad he was that year, the fact that they won the Super Bowl just makes no sense.
I know.
I think he had, like, in the regular season, I want to say he had, like, 11 touchdown passes to 19 interceptions, and they won the Super Bowl. It's like, when do you ever see that happen?
Yeah, that defense that year, though, they have a one hell of a defense in Denver, but there's
Nightmares.
always going to be a voice in the back of my head saying Super Bowl 50 was a fix.
Don't kill me. Segueing over, then you got the actual best quarterback in the league at home against your guys' defense. How do you see this one playing out?
Not so well. Not so well at all. The good news is that this game is going to produce a ton of fantasy points. All the fantasy points are going to be for the Chiefs in the first half, and all the fantasy points, well, they'll probably stay with the Chiefs in the second half, but Carolina will have plenty of opportunities in garbage time in the fourth quarter. But, this is one of those games where I'm going to watch it for my fantasy team, but I'm going to cringe as a Panthers fan.
For sure. Just touching
Especially
upon the
in Arrowhead, too.
just touching upon that Chiefs. I mean, that offense, dude, like if Mecole Hardman, who by the way, one of my favorite players, like to take his price right now compared to his upside is just insane. If he's able to actually get a target share in that team, like I know you can't just transfer efficiencies on 26 targets or 41 targets and ultimately project them for if he got like 80, 90, but hypothetically, Sammy Watkins had 90 targets in 14 games. I briefly mentioned in our previous video on our Deep Sleepers episode. Sammy Watkins had 90 targets in 14 games. If you were to give Mecole Hardman that wide receiver 2 share of the offense, that 90 targets, obviously you can't, again, project those efficiencies on 41. But if you were to use them on those 90 targets, it equated to 57 catches for 1,181 yards and 13 touchdowns. Like – how does that happen? He caught a touchdown on like 14% of his targets and like 24% of his total catches. It's like, what?
Mecole Hardman is fantastic. The fact that they have him and Tyreek Hill lining up opposite of each other, like that's just not even fair. And then to top it all off, you have Travis Kelce in the middle of the field, and you are about to have Clyde Edwards also right there. It's like
it's insanity.
It's
like,
not fair what they have working with.
I mean, you saw before the video started, little spoiler, but the Super Bowl pick, and that's for a reason. I mean, I just don't see anybody stopping that offense all year, to be honest.
They're too good, man.
Literally.
Even their defense is pretty decent too. So it's like I don't know what anyone's going to do. Like, as far as I'm concerned, the Chiefs are going to be the Super Bowl winners for the next 3 years.
For sure. I just don't see anybody stopping them. But, segueing back, you mentioned Buccaneers curse, but you play them at home this time. So is there anything you change here? Or what are your thoughts on this game?
I will take Carolina at home against the Bucs. I think by week 10, hopefully the entire league will understand what Tampa Bay is doing. We'll kind of have a better vision on how it's going on and how Brady's playing with the new team, what Gronk's usage is. This is going to be one of those games where it's going to be close. And unlike Atlanta and Carolina, Tampa Bay and Carolina is almost never a shootout. It's usually a very back and forth game with the defenses really showcasing. And I think this is one where Carolina might be able to put it together in front of their home crowd.
Yeah, I like that. I do believe that, especially divisional at home. It could definitely go for Carolina's way. I like it for sure. Going on to week 11, you guys end up playing the Lions at home. And we have the Lions here, but what are your thoughts on Lions Panthers here? Because I do believe this can go either way, but what are you thinking?
I think this game it's definitely a toss-up, but if Detroit has a healthy Matt Stafford, that team's kind of legit. I do really like the Lions offense. I'm not going to lie. I really don't know a whole hell of a lot of their defense or their defensive schemes or anything like that. But I can tell you that's an offense that I don't want our defense to play against. So assuming that Matt Stafford is healthy in week 11, I'd give that to Detroit.
I like it. A big question that people are going to have about the Lions, especially like in terms of fantasy, what's going on with that running back situation? What do you ultimately see happening there? Swift, carry on. That's a big question mark. Ultimately, Matt Stafford's back as well, but I do think he can bounce back. I don't think it's necessarily an issue some people are making it, but what are your thoughts on the running back situation especially?
So I am one of DeAndre Swift's biggest fans. Before the draft, he was my RB1. And even after the draft, he's still in my top 3. Like, obviously, you can't put him ahead of Clyde Edwards in Kansas City. It's as much as I want to put him ahead of John Taylor in Indianapolis, you just can't because that offensive line is just too damn good. But I do think as soon as this year, I think DeAndre Swift is going to take on a majority role. Now, he's not going to be a workhorse, at least not in 2020. Maybe he develops into one in 2021 or 2022, especially since he's had pretty low usage to this point in his career. Like, he really wasn't overused in college or anything like that. My projections, I currently have, off the top of my head, I think DeAndre Swift is around 190 carries and Kerryon Johnson is around 130. So it's a pretty decent split, just based off of the amount of times Detroit rushed last year and how I think things are going to be affected with Matt Stafford back at the helm. I do think DeAndre Swift I do think he's going to be at least in PPR leagues, I think he's going to be a top 20 running back. I wouldn't have massive expectations for him, but I think he's going to be a very, very serviceable RB2 in most weeks.
That's music to my ears because I ended up in one of my dynasty leagues for the Discord league that we're running. I ended up trading back at the third round. He was still available. Kind of ended the tier off. We just saw guys like Dobbins, Drake kind of go. So made sure, okay, DeAndre Swift, last one in the tier. Traded up for him, got him. And I'm a contender this year, so that's kind of music to my ears, just even hearing that. I also have him decently high. I believe I have him in my top 20. I think I have him at 20, or he's definitely in my top 25. I do think people are, again, as you mentioned, are sleeping on the situation. Like, they just assume that, okay, whatever. Kerryon's going to be too involved for him to thrive. But, I mean, if we're looking at it, when Kerryon was healthy last year, the big thing that I keep referring back to is when Kerryon was healthy last year, he was getting over 16 touches per game. And ultimately, I do think, okay, the competition behind Kerryon last year was way worse than what the competition behind DeAndre Swift is going to be this year, given Kerryon. But, I mean, that just shows me that if you divvy that up even a little bit, I mean, say he gets 13, 14 opportunities a game, that's more than enough for me to have him returning value, especially the work he's going to get in the receiving game. As you mentioned, you project 190 carries. I mean, that's a lot of work for a guy ultimately that people are just kind of writing off in his first year. So I'm agreeing with you there. I do like DeAndre Swift's outlook for this year, and especially from a dynasty perspective. He's going to be fun. But
yeah, and I'll have to do a little shameless plug here because I'm actually currently working on an article about DeAndre Swift that I'm going to be coming out with next week. It's not out yet, so don't go looking for it just yet. But I genuinely think that he's got potential to be the highest scoring rookie running back this year. I genuinely think that because, a lot of people are going to go and say that's going to be Clyde Edwards, but Damian Williams, if it wasn't Pat Mahomes by name, Damian Williams would have been the Super Bowl MVP. I mean, he was absolute lights out. And as much as Kansas City wants to start using Clyde Edwards, I know he's got that first round draft cap and everything like that, but Damian Williams is still there for at least another year, and that offense is going to absolutely use him. So I think literally every single one of these rookies that was drafted, the running backs at least, they're all going to find themselves in timeshares. And I just think DeAndre Swift has the best chance to kind of run away with his timeshare.
I agree with that. I mean, again, there's no real situation like Jacobs to the Raiders last year. In a sense, like he was the only guy. He's going to get the full workload right away. Like all these guys, especially the top guys, like one of my favorites even too, J.K. Dobbins, for example. He's getting a timeshare with a guy with Mark Ingram, who was literally a top 10 back last year. So some of these guys that we're mentioning, the top 2 draft capital is what you like, top 50 overall. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you're expecting them to just be a league winner from year one, ultimately, I would say temper. Again, they fully have the upside if they do end up getting the full workload. But I will agree with you there is that there's more risk overall than people are willing to acknowledge. So by just diminishing the value of Swift to hype up the other guys like Taylor and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I do agree that in the sense that we should be kind of viewing them kind of in a cluster, if I'll say. But transitioning, back to Panthers. Big Panthers fan over here. Let's get through the schedule. I know you're optimistic about just kind of seeing where they're going to end up, but 4-12 right now. Still got a few weeks to kind of turn over for you to evaluate. So let's get going. Week 12. after the game against the Lions. We're ended up going on the road versus the Vikings. We currently have the Vikings here, but what are your thoughts on this matchup?
I'm going to give this one to the Vikings too, especially just with them being the home team. Now, I keep referring to home teams, assuming that there's going to be fans in these stadiums this year. Fingers crossed, but we'll see about that. But either way, the Minnesota Vikings, their team is good, man. Like they have a solid defense. Their offense is solid. I'm interested to see how things go without Stephon Diggs. I know that him and Kirk Cousins didn't really see eye to eye, but when they connected, damn, they connected. That offense, even without him, is still going to be very good. Obviously, by week 12, even if Dalvin Cook does somehow hold out into the season, there's no shot he's not on the field by week 12. And I just don't think this is an offense that Carolina is going to be able to handle, and I don't think that Carolina's offense is going to be able to best the Vikings defense.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. It's just tough because on paper, you look at it, the Vikings kind of, I don't want to say have the advantage all over, but your biggest strengths on offense are kind of like what they do best on defense. Aside from maybe being able to cover DJ Moore, which may be the only way you'll really be able to exploit them in the sense that they do have a young secondary. But again, their front seven, really good. Danielle Hunter, good linebacking core. Ultimately, your biggest strength on offense is going to be McCaffrey, but that's a tough front to play against. Now, if you have McCaffrey in fantasy, that doesn't mean fucking put him on your bench because he's still going to be a god. But I'm just saying, in terms of an overall football standpoint, it's going to be a tough. So I'll agree with you there. Week 13 bye week just kind of seems weird to me because I don't see this. Maybe a factor if you're in a playoff push. But, either way, you're taking fucking McCaffrey. But if we're talking Ian Thomas and stuff, okay.
I could have sworn this past year there were no – maybe I'm just making this up. But have Week 13 buys always been a thing, or is that new? Because
I think they're new. I think the latest I've ever seen before this was Week 12.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing too because, I remember just by playing fantasy football that I don't think I've ever ran into an issue where I've had a player on bye right before the playoffs start. So that's really weird, and it makes me kind of ticked off that I'm not going to have Christian McCaffrey in my last regular season game.
Yeah, I just looking at that. It's definitely a dynamic to kind of keep under eye. If you're 6-6 going into your final week of the season, and you need your stud to play, say you have McCaffrey. To be fair, if you have McCaffrey, you're probably not going to be 6-6. But say I don't know, Ian Thomas or I don't know,
DJ Moore.
DJ Moore is a fantastic one. Say you have DJ Moore and he's got his bye week here. That's you're never going to consider that when you're actually drafting your teams, but it's just kind of something that's going to hinder you in the long run. You're going to be like, oh damn, well fuck, I'm kind of a middling team. I need to make the playoff push, and I'm without one of my studs here. But at the end of the day, all these bye weeks are going to end up getting evened out. So if you're able to get past that game, you still have your guys for the playoffs, and that's ultimately where it matters. Get in the playoffs, and from there on, it's a show. So right after the bye, got the Broncos at home. What are your thoughts on this game? It could definitely bring back some bad memories, as we were mentioning earlier.
Anytime I see Denver versus Carolina, I just have nightmares for the next couple of days. Will I give this game to Carolina? No, I'm gonna. You guys have Denver marked as this. I'm actually gonna leave this with Denver. I am a bit lower than most people on Denver's potential this year. I think people are being way too high on Drew Lock. It would come to a surprise to most people, but Joe Flacco obviously had over 100 more attempts than Drew Lock did, but he had more yards per attempt, more yards per completion, and a better completion percentage. And I'm not, by no means am I, coming down on Drew Lock. It's just that he's played 5 games in the NFL. This entire offense is so incredibly young, and it's going to take them a little while to get on track. I don't think we can have these massive hopes and this big potential for Denver's offense for most of the season. But by week 14, I think they're going to have it figured out, and this is not going to be a team that I want to play against.
Yeah, I got you. I'll agree with there too. the thing that really gets me with Denver, why I'm a little more bullish on the team, isn't like, I do think Drew Lock does take the step. I don't think he's going to be like a top 10 type quarterback that some people are hyping him up to eventually enter. But I mean, if you look at the foundation of the team, Melvin Gordon was a good addition. Adds a little pass catching to the element to their running back core. I mean, people want to think that Philip Lindsay's a good pass catcher just because he's a fucking small back. But you actually look at the numbers, you look at the efficiencies. I mean, Philip Lindsay was not that receiving type back last year. So I think a guy like Melvin Gordon can kind of provide that for your team. I do think their offensive skill positions definitely got better. I mean, Jerry Jeudy, great receiver. KJ Hamler, added Alberto to back up Noah Fant. And I believe they actually added a couple additions to their offensive line. So I do think their offense as a whole is going to get better. But the main strength of that team is going to be their defense. I mean, the loss of Chris Harris is going to hurt a ton, but I mean, that front seven is going to be fantastic. They still got players on the back end. Justice Simmons on the franchise. So I do think they're going to be a pretty good team. I think they're going to maybe be a fringe type playoff team, but anybody's going to hype them up to, like I saw once, like, oh, don't be surprised if the Broncos win the division. Like, here, come on. I think it was Colin Coward who said that. Oh, Drew Lock's gonna be an MVP candidate. They're gonna win. Like, come on, man. Do you actually do the research before shit spews out of your mouth? Just all these, like, some of these analysts just bother me. It's like, are you actually making these takes on your own, or are you having people write them up, or what are you watching? Like, I don't know. We'll get into that another time because just a pet peeve of mine. But transitioning, week 15, you guys are on the road, Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers at home, Matt LaFleur. What are your thoughts on this game here?
So before we get into this game, I'm looking at the schedule as like a whole. And Carolina's rushing defense is going to need to step the hell up this year. I'm looking at all these teams that we just talked about, and holy shit, are they playing against some fantastic talent on the ground. Yeah. And it does not get any easier when they get Aaron Jones in week 15. Like, this – They're not going to win against Green Bay, especially in week 15. I mean, Green Bay over the last few weeks of the regular season, they're always good. They play fantastic in cold weather. Their fans get pumped up in cold weather. Aaron Rodgers plays some of his best football when the playoffs are on the line. And I think, Green Bay is definitely going to be playing for a playoff position in week 15. So I just given the narrative and the talent that's on that Green Bay team, I can't imagine Carolina coming in here and getting a win.
I agree with that, especially, Lambeau, December month. It's going to be cold, going to be frigid. People are going to want to hit, especially from the Green Bay side. Physical, veteran team. I mean, you don't think Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, those guys are going to be licking their chops. So looking at it, I do agree with you there, especially with that two-headed rushing attack now. They took Dillon in the second round. Still have Aaron Jones there. I'll agree with you there. I do think the Packers end up sneaking away with that at home. Week 16, the revenge of your old coach, Riverboat Ron, at home, representing the Redskins now. What are your thoughts on this? Because this is an interesting game from that aspect in the sense of the return. But, I mean, if you're looking at it on paper, I do think the Panthers have more talent. But do you think that factor of Riverboat Ron facing his old team takes the narrative? Or, like, what are your thoughts on this matchup in general?
I think it absolutely takes the narrative. Ron Rivera is a fantastic coach, and if he is even half as successful with Washington as he was with Carolina when he first took over Carolina, this team is going to be ready to go to battle for that man. And that team is not going to let him lose to the Panthers. As much as you're right, Carolina is definitely more talented, on paper. But I don't think this is a game that they're going to be able to steal because that whole team is going to take it personally for Ron Rivera because by week 16 of the season, Ron Rivera is going to own that team.
I agree with you. I mean, Ron Rivera is just such a polarizing figure. Definitely a veteran, successful coach over the years. I mean, I actually recently looked into the splits of the Panthers when he was actually the coach last year versus when he got fired. And just in general, the offensive output, the team output in general, like they just, you could tell, you probably saw it too personally just watching the team play, but the numbers kind of spiked off a little bit once he got fired. And whether that's effective his coaching, whether that's effective the team being dejected by losing their coach, by a guy they've been fighting for in the locker room for the past, 6, 7 years, 8 years now. That's a big factor. So I do think in the future, Ron Rivera could end up leading the Redskins back to relevance. But yeah, I'll agree with you with that matchup specifically. But Redskins may struggle this year, but 2021 and on, especially if they get another high draft pick, a Penei Sewell or Haskins disappoints, maybe a quarterback. But I do agree with you there. I do think the Redskins do sneak that out. So I'll agree with the expert, or not the expert, the consensus. My bad. The FSC consensus. I don't want to just throw expert out the door, but anyways, let me transition off that. Week finale for the regular season, week 17. You got the Saints coming into town playing against the Panthers. Fun matchup. The aspect that I will say is interesting to me is if the Saints are going to be as good as we think they're going to be, are they going to be resting starters in this game? Now, with only one bye week versus two, would they be fighting for that one? Or it's definitely going to add a lot more interest to this game. But ultimately, what are your thoughts on the ultimate outcome here?
I think by week 17, the New Orleans Saints are already going to have their bye week cemented. And they'll probably still be playing for that number one overall seed. But obviously, if they're still going to come away with a bye, they really could care less at the end of the day. They want to make sure their players are healthy. So I can see this as definitely being a game where their starters at max only play the first half. So I'm actually going to give this game to Carolina just because I think they're going to be playing against backups in a completely meaningless game for the New Orleans Saints.
I do want to mention one thing. There's only one bye week now in the new transition for the playoff seeding because of the 7th seed. So there's only one bye week, which is only the first seed now. Yeah, because there's 7 teams, so they have the 2 versus 7, the 3 versus 6, and the 4 versus 5 now.
Oh, shit. I completely forgot about that. Okay, well then, yeah, you know what? Then I would give this game to the Saints. If they don't have a bye week, fully cemented, then they're going to go out and they're going to win this game. They're going to try to get into the bye week.
Okay. I'll agree with you there. I do think maybe Panthers will be fired up. Maybe they upset them, but ultimately, if the Saints have something to play for, as you mentioned, that team's just too good to let ultimately Drew Brees, one of his last Super Bowl runs, ultimately go to waste by falling in playoff seeding. So I'll agree with you there. Looking at the overall record, we ended up coming to 4-12, kind of in the area you were mentioning. You said 5-6 wins, maybe optimistic. You gave them 7, and you were mentioning a couple 50-50s. You gave the other way, so pretty on board with what you were saying before we started. But what are the biggest discrepancies between where you were at before we went through the schedule, where you're at now? What are you just thinking overall, ultimately, that you didn't realize or you didn't see before we started, maybe?
Well, as I mentioned, that defense is going to struggle against the run this year. They're a very, very, very young team. We don't have Luke Kuechly anymore. So I think, especially with the schedule, Carolina is poised to have like a bottom 6 rushing defense this year. I'm just being honest. The secondary, they should improve. But again, in the NFC South, I mean, you're against Brady, you're against Matt Ryan, you're against Drew Brees. That includes Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans 6 times a year. Like,
yeah,
it's not going to be a confidence building season at all. It's going to be a season that's going to make every single Carolina fan want to tear their hair out. And let's just cross our fingers and hope that they make some sort of move to trade up to number 1 overall on draft day, get Trevor Lawrence, and start riding the ship.
I agree with you there. I believe if we check here, we went through 4-12. I want to see how that impacted your chances on Lawrence, because prior to starting, they were 2-14. I believe they had the number 1. So we'll see how that affected the overall outlook of the team in terms of draft position. But let me just check here. Yeah, so you guys end up with the 5th overall pick. I mean, that's still territory. If you don't end up trading up, you can maybe get like a Lance or a Fields, but ultimately, I do believe they'll probably end up in that area. So, what are your thoughts on the 5th position, and what would you be most looking for at that spot, personally?
At the 5th, I'd probably still be going for See, I like the idea of continuing to build the defense up, but I also like the idea of still going for quarterback, even if you can't get Trevor Lawrence. What's his face? That other guy. What's his name?
Justin Fields?
Justin Fields. There's some good quarterback talent coming in, and they're gonna have to go for it, man. Like even if they can't move up from 5, which hopefully they can, because I would really like Trevor Lawrence. But they're going to have to get a quarterback because it just, as we were saying, Teddy Bridgewater is not the future, and it is very, very, very hard for a team to come together without any true leadership on the offense. And as good of a leader as Christian McCaffrey is, I mean, there's only so much he can do. He's not the guy leading the workouts or even throwing the ball to these receivers. You know what I mean? So they need to go out and they need to get a franchise quarterback if they have a top 5 pick.
I agree with you there. Again, as you mentioned, Teddy Bridgewater, in my opinion, in your opinion as well, he's not going to be the answer. So I like the quarterback group that's coming in for next year. I mean, we mentioned Fields and Lawrence. Trey Lance, another one that's been getting a ton of hype.
Trey Lance, that's the guy I was thinking of.
Yeah, been getting a lot of hype out of North Dakota State. People are likening him to the other North Dakota State prospect that came out a few years ago, if you mentioned his name, Carson Wentz. I do think they're different in terms of their overall game. I do think Trey Lance is a little more decisive, really good decision maker, which is ultimately one of Wentz's biggest bugaboos, if you want to say. Coupled with his overall ball security compared to Wentz coming out was a little bit better. But again, if you're getting compared to a guy like Wentz, I'm not going to have my bias take over. Like Wentz is a top 10 quarterback. If you're getting that sort of hype coming out of the same school as him, it's definitely warranted. So if Carolina's able to get any of those 3 quarterbacks, even if like a guy like Penei Sewell fell, like a top tackle, you guys are in a good position there at number 5. So definitely in a really good draft class for 2021, just projecting forward. So would this be the ideal area for you, being in the top 5, or ultimately, like, say you made a playoff push and failed and you ended up in the teens, or like what are you thinking overall from a team outlook standpoint? Like what you would be most preferred?
So my preferred thing, obviously you always want your team to make playoffs, but if I'm being realistic, Carolina's not going to make the playoffs in 2020. So the only thing that would make me happy is if we have a top 3 draft pick, because there's so much work that needs to be done on this team. Even if we have number 5, the amount of draft cap and or players that you're going to have to trade away to move up into that top 2, top 3 to get your guy. It's going to be too much. And as a team that's rebuilding and currently paying the highest paid running back ever, you want them not to have to mortgage a future to trade up for one guy. So in my mind, if we don't make the playoffs, which we're not going to, I would be very disappointed with anything less than a top 3 pick.
I agree with that. Again, you don't want to necessarily throw out the tank word, but if my team's not making the playoffs, it's tough, because even if, like, for example, like I was kind of in this predicament with Dallas last year. I just knew that the special team struggles, the coaching struggles would ultimately be insurmountable. Even if they made the playoffs, would have to play a team like Seattle in the first round. And just from the coaching and overall, like, special teams unit standpoint, like last year, the Cowboys were a mess. So I wasn't necessarily rooting against them making the playoffs, but I looked at it from an objective standpoint. I said, okay, listen, what do I want to get flustered in the first round and get the 22nd overall pick? Or ultimately where they ended up, where they got CeeDee Lamb, and you're able to make a push for the year after. So it's tough. I will say, as an NFL fan, you never want to see your team lose, but sometimes to better the franchise for the future, you're more willing to accept it. So I agree with you there. Top 5 pick, even like a top 3 pick, as you mentioned, for Carolina would be huge for that team moving forward, especially with the potential given those coaching changes. I mean, Joe Brady, Matt Rule, got the pieces on offense, still rebuilding the defense, but I mean, you got some young pieces. I mean, Derek Brown, Shaq Thompson still kind of in his prime. You guys definitely got the pieces to move forward. So maybe you guys struggle again. We mentioned this year, but projecting forward, good team to watch. So what were your thoughts on just past this year, maybe?
I mean, well, let me first by saying I do like what they did in the draft this year. I was a little disappointed when they didn't take Isaiah Simmons when they could have, because especially with Luke Kuechly going out the door and Isaiah Simmons just being, natural born, put him anywhere on the field, he's going to be fantastic. I was a little disappointed that they didn't get him, but then when they turned around and they got Gross Matos to pair with Derek Brown. Our defensive line just went from a bottom 3 to at least average in the first year, and that's going to make me really happy. I mean, that is a tandem. Those two guys right there, if they develop as they're supposed to, I mean, we could have a very dominant defensive line within a few years, which would make me very happy. Past this year, obviously, you know how I feel about Teddy Bridgewater. I don't really want to, who knows? Maybe he comes in and he's like absolutely fantastic this year and he completely changes my mind. But this is not going to be a winning team as long as he is controlling that offense. So we'll see what happens there. I would like to see them go out and make a splash. For example, I was looking at it and I know people are kind of split on Jadeveon Clowney. But when you look at it, what I look at, and the big reason why I don't like Teddy Bridgewater is because we could have still drafted Isaiah Simmons. We could have signed Jadeveon Clowney for whatever terrible contract he wants. And instead of taking Teddy Bridgewater, we could have just rolled with Kyle Allen for an extra year. And I think by this time next year, once we kind of start to figure out the quarterback position, I think that team would be a lot of fun to watch. Then again, I'm not the GM. I don't know nearly as much as these guys do. So there's a reason behind everything. I try to put faith in the management there, and I'm along for the ride.
Well, yeah, went through everything today. Again, we made some changes to the schedule based on like your overall predictions versus what we had. Again, ended up increasing your win total from 2 to 4. So definitely a lot more reasonable, personally, in my opinion. But yeah, man, blast having you on. Again, anything you want to quickly shout out before we get out of here, or yeah.
Yeah, so like I said at the beginning, just feel free to follow me over on Twitter at ff_Mikey10. I basically live on Twitter, constantly tweeting out about football, and I love discussing, having conversations. And then I will have an article coming out on Loaded Box. You can find them on Twitter at Loaded Box. And I'm going to have a nice DeAndre Swift article out probably within the next 4 or 5 days, so stay tuned for that.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate having you on, and yeah, we'll just get out of here. Enjoy your weekend. We're recording this on a Friday, and hopefully for your sake, the Panthers definitely just keep striving to improve. So yeah, appreciate that, man. Anyways, peace out. See ya.